All right, continuing with our spot illustration digital coloring demo. Just to review, I did a drawing. I inked that drawing. I scanned that inked drawing and brought it into Photoshop and got rid of all the whites, and this is what it looked like. You can see the raster makes it all kind of bumpy, but I liked my drawing. So then I opened that up in Illustrator and live traced it, and then worked with the vector a little bit, cleaned up the shapes a little bit. These are all in the past videos, to get nice clean line work for this image. So much smoother, much cleaner, and because it's a vector, it's infinitely scalable, so it will always be the highest resolution possible. Then I brought it into a Photoshop file. Okay, and I did that by opening up File New, a brand new Photoshop file, 11 by 14 inches by 350 inches, because my spot illustration is taller than it is wide. That's why the width is smaller than the height. But around 11 by 14, that's the easiest, kind of largest size we can print. And then I said okay, and that just gives me a blank file. And then I was able to take the EPS, the vector EPS, and just drag and drop it on. That's the only way to get a smart vector layer in Photoshop. And then size it and place it. And that way you have a smart vector layer that it won't allow you to edit without rasterizing. And I don't want to rasterize it. I want to lock it. And I want to keep it nice and clean and on top. You see, and it's automatically rasterizing to 350 pixels per inch at this size, 11 by 14. So much cleaner than just my inked line alone. Now between the white layer of the background and the black line work floating on top here, I want to create a new layer, which is called my flat color layer. And flat color is local color. Unless you're doing something really expressionistic, where you're not using the colors things actual are. Flat color is local color. And this is the basic way you do it. You lock your ink lines above, you lock your background behind, and you start painting with your paintbrush and your palette. So let me just pick a color. If I wanted blue antlers, I'd pick a blue, and then I can just use my paintbrush. I like to use one of these two middle ones because they're sensitive, pressure sensitive to size. And I start with a pretty large size, and I start with the hardness at 100 and opacity at 100, flow at 100, and I could just start painting behind. It's like filling in a coloring book. And that's the first stage of digital coloring and digital painting, to just fill in the flat colors. Now the problem with just painting behind, you can see what I'm doing on my color layer here, is that it's very possible for me, just like in a coloring book, to accidentally go outside the lines. Right? But that's not a big deal. But if I wanted to use the advantage of having really defined shapes, if you happen to have really defined shapes, I can go to my ink layer and I can use the magic wand tool, and even though it's locked, if I click on contiguous and a tolerance of 32, which is a nice default, I can click inside the shapes. And as long as everything's contained, I can then go back to my local layer and use the paint bucket and just drop in that color within that selection. And then hit Command D to deselect, and that will give me a much sharper way of coloring than just painting behind. But ultimately, it gives you the same result. Right? Just a flat color behind. This one I just need to erase and repaint to get it to be as clean. So at the end of the last demo, I had flatted in a bunch of colors. This is what they look like. Right? And if there was a shape that wasn't contained, let me just give you an example. I'll make a new layer here to just show you. Let's say that I have an outline like this that has an opening in it. But I wanted to fill that whole shape in. Of course, I could just go to my flat color layer, pick a color, paint underneath it and just try not to go outside the lines, right? And if I do go outside the lines, I could simply erase at 100% opacity, right? And get it all. But if I wanted to be able to select it all as a clean shape, one that wasn't so lumpy like that, I could create a duplicate of that smart layer, like I have here, and mark it red, because I know I'll get rid of it before I'm done. Rasterize it, like I did with this layer. You can see it's no longer a smart layer. And on that layer, I just paint in little bits. It actually doesn't even matter what color I use, but I'll use black to fill in the shape, like that, to make sure the shapes are contained. And then it's much easier for me to just select them and then fill them with the color. And so the difference between those is pretty extreme. The clarity of it. So you decide how you want to color in your flat colors behind, but that's always the first step. Now remember, there's a handout to help you see all of these options and know how to approach it, because this is very different. And that handout is found in our Canvas page. So you just log into ACES, and we're going to be using this for the next several projects. And you're going to go to our digital class under My Courses, go to the Canvas page, and then go to Links. And this is a PDF document. You can view it on any device. You should be able to print it, but of course printing in color would be good since this is about digital coloring. But just referring back to it, you can save it onto your computer. I release the copyright to you. Please don't make money off of it. It's Creative Commons copyright. Right? And what you can see from it is that flat local color is always the first step. Behind clean vector line work is ideal for digital coloring. This is all digital coloring. Outside of this gray box, we get into digital painting. But it still starts, even if you're doing digital painting, it still starts with local flat color. Sometimes flat color is really complicated, like on this apple, which is gold and red at the same time. Those are both local flat colors. But in this kiwi, it's very simple. Local flat colors. Once we have all the flat colors in, then we start adding shadow tones, if we want to. But sometimes local color is enough, right? So how do you know how you're going to color your... Let me download this so I can bring it up a little bit easier in the future. How do you know what kind of coloring is best for your image? It has a lot to do with what you're going for. And so what I like to do is find inspiration. Sometimes I'll find inspiration in color palettes. Like I like these two color palettes, which are derived from Gerhard Richter paintings. So I'll open those up in Photoshop. And these are just palettes I can steal colors from. They look nice and celebratory, festive. They would work well for a Christmas card, right? And then the other kind of thing that I'll grab are images that I think have an interesting use of coloring. So these are both digitally colored images with vector line work. This uses what's called duotone color. In some areas, like in the fur of the deer, it has two tones of the brown, so that's duotone color, a light brown and a dark brown. But then in other places, like the green of the corn, it's just flat color. It's just one green. And then in some places, like the ears of the corn, or not the ears, the kernels of the corn, it's duotone again, and on and on and on, right? So different versions. And then this one, these are lots of different cool spot illustrations. It's almost like a tattoo flash sheet. And you can see that they have duotone color They have duotone color with a what's called a color hold, where they replace the black lines with a color. They have duotone color here. They have just flat color here. But all of their duotones, for the most part, seem really crisp. And that's called cut edge duotone. But then in some of them, like, let's see, like in the lion's head here, the duotone is softer and it blends from light to dark. It gradates, and that's called a soft edge duotone. So what do we look at for that? Well, we can look at that handout, and we can see those different variations. Soft edge duotone, where you gradate between the lights and darks, or hard edge or cut edge, which is what they use in animation, which is where you have this really clean delineation between the lights and the darks. And then from there, we can go to more special effects, adding more color than just the variations on the local color. And we'll get to all of that. All right, so how do I use this inspiration? Well, I might open it up separately like this, in its own file, floating in Photoshop. And what I can do is I can steal colors from it. So this is open in Photoshop. I'm on my brush tool. If I hold down Option, it turns my brush into a dropper tool, which is fantastic. If I want to steal a color, like the red of this color hold, or the pink of that shield, and then I can go back to my flat color layer, and I can paint with it. Right? So let me fill in the rest of the flat color. So the rest of this tree, let me steal a color from here. Maybe I want to use this muted green for the rest of my tree stump. And then I'm simply going to use the magic wand on my vector layer, hold down Shift so I can add multiple selections, select all these leaves, all these branches, everything but the acorn itself. I have to zoom in because we're getting into pretty small selections here. I can do that. Remember, I'm selecting the whites, not the black line. And what's nice about that, everything but the acorns, right? I guess that's not an acorn, that's a leaf. No, maybe it is an acorn. I'll undo that. All right. And then I'll just use the paint bucket once and it will fill it all in with that color I stole. But I need to be on my flat color layer. Voila. And maybe I want that here as well. Go to my flat color layer, and you get used to this. This is called flatting. And you see it filled them all in very precisely, very neatly around the black lines. Now I need a color for those acorns. I like this orange here. So I'm going to hold down Option from my paint tool, go back here, and I could, of course, just use my paintbrush and paint them. But if I accidentally go outside of the lines, that's not good. So they're nice and contained, so I might as well use the magic wand, select all the acorns, go to my flat color layer, drop it all in. Now what about these? I can also steal colors from myself, right? So for these berries, these kind of holly berries, hold down Shift to add to your selection. I can use a color I've used somewhere else already, up here. Drop that in. And then I want a different green for this. Maybe this kind of bluish green. So I hold down Option while I'm on a brush tool or the paint bucket tool. That changes my color. Go back to here. I could paint them in. It's just a slightly different green than that green. Or of course, I can go here, select both shapes fully,